foundational component of economic sovereignty, political independence, and of course psychological decolonization is what you can call epistemological sovereignty, which is when we stop basing our understanding of the world, stop basing our interpretation of reality, and stop using the paradigms and the intellectual frameworks of the West and start using our own. Stop using the ways that the colonizers explained and the way that the colonizers portrayed how the world works. Because, of course, everything that they said was always and only said for the purpose of maintaining their position, maintaining their advantage, and for the purpose of delegitimizing and dehumanizing and invalidating us. They've always been in the rationale creation business. In fact, that's just about the only thing that they ever did create, if we're being honest. Because everything that they have was actually taken, was actually stolen, was actually pillaged or plagiarized from other people, from other nations. So in fact, what they created was just the rationale or the justification for doing that, for doing all that theft. And that pervades all of their intellectual frameworks. Even before the West went secular, even before they went atheist, they were this way, and that's the way they did things. They didn't use religion for justice, they only used religion for justification. So we have to reject their frameworks, reject their paradigms by default. Because you can't tell me that any framework, you can't tell me that any paradigm, and you can't tell me that any understanding of the world or for interpreting reality, any framework that was created to justify rape and pillage and chattel slavery and genocide, you can't tell me that any framework like that is ever going to be useful to civilized people. No, you have to reject it. A poison root grows a poison tree and bears poison fruit. Even if it might have pretty blossoms on it, the fruit is no good. The tree is no good, and the root is no good. Whatever they built was built at a human cost that their descendants are going to be paying for generations. Like I've said before, yes, you have your technology in the West, and we all use it. But good Lord, we have the right to use it. We have more right to use it than you do, in fact. We have the right to use it because it was all developed with our resources, with our minerals, with our metals, with our energy, with our blood and our sweat and our tears. No, you don't get to boast about your technology, as if we should be grateful to you for what you made or what you built with our resources. And then you act like the fact that we use the technology that you made with our resources, that means that we're not supposed to blame you for all the theft and for all the murder. I mean, what kind of logic is that? You see, this is the logical West. That's what I mean. It's not just a poison tree, it's a whole forest of toxic intellectual chicanery. We need to make our way out of those woods. And for us, for the Muslims, the first thing that we need to do to reclaim or to revive our epistemological sovereignty is to restore Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Quran and the Sunnah to their rightful place, right at the center of our understanding. Because I think a lot of people, even amongst our own people, even among the Muslims, a lot of people have inadvertently been infected by the West's view of God. That God is just a concept, an abstraction. God is just a device for instantiating virtue. God is just a philosophical tool for them. But no, God is real. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is real. Allahul Haqq. And you're never going to be able to understand reality. You're never going to be able to understand the world if you don't understand this reality. This is the most fundamental reality there is. So that has to be our base. That must be our base, our foundation, the reality of God and the truth about everything that he said about himself. And the truth about everything he said about his creation. This is fundamental. It's foundational. If you don't have that, then you have no floor to stand on. I don't care what you do, what kind of walls you have, what kind of roof or what kind of ceiling you built. If you don't have a floor, well, all you have is a decorated hole. You just have a decorated chasm. You have a decorated abyss. That's what you have when you build your paradigms, you build your frameworks, and you build your understanding of the world without the fundamental, foundational understanding of the reality of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the reality of God.
Now, the Western world crafted their ways into supremacy by ensuring that they first used these other regions for their enrichment. And that is the message that Shaheed Bolsen is trying to bring across in this video, because during the ancient times and slavery, the West used or forcefully used the efforts of the black men and even other regions to build what they term today developed or the modern economy. Now, I want you to watch this video with an open mind, as I always say it, of understanding how the black people and other inferior or regarded as inferior races have always been made to be poor and been made to be inferior. Let us watch and talk about it in the end.
So our earlier scholars all understood this. They all understood the dynamism of this reality, and it shaped the way that they understood, it shaped the way that they analyzed, shaped the way they interpreted the world. And that's what we have to do. Because, okay, we talk about analysis, we talk about analysts, but really from the Muslim point of view, what we are is witnesses. I'm commissioned to be a witness. The Muslims, all of the Muslims, we're commissioned to be witnesses, to tell the truth, to state the facts, to testify the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And in a world that has been dominated by the West for so long, well, a great deal of our testimony is inevitably going to just be setting the record straight regarding their endless lies. Like I said before, because they lie all the time about everything, it would absolutely be impossible for us to even do our job as witnesses, to tell the truth by means of their frameworks. So I don't know from capitalism, I don't know from socialism, I don't know from communism or democracy or authoritarianism or right or left or what have you. These are all just like lawyers' tricks, word games, all these qualifiers that are supposed to impose definitions and meanings onto your mind that have no actual resemblance to reality. That's what they do. That's what these labels do. They're more like bandages. No, we look at the way things are, not according to the labels that the West uses to falsely categorize things. Because America is not democratic and China is not communist. So get out of here with that foolishness. You know, we look at how things operate in the real world, how they operate in real life, and we testify to that. We bear witness to what is really going on, regardless of who is doing it or what they're calling it. I mean, you can call that analysis if you want to, but it's actually nothing more than just bearing witness to reality. That's all we're doing. And again, that's why, all of this is why, at Middle Nation, we have developed and we are developing our own tools for discerning things, for discerning reality, like relative power dynamics, like strategic probabilities, like assessing the real impact of current events on the Muslim world, or like measuring and quantifying trends of instability in the West and so on, without relying solely on the metrics that are used by Western political scientists, or Western economists, or Western geopolitical analysts. Because we understand that some of the metrics that they use don't actually matter the way they say they do, and also that there are things that matter a great deal that they completely leave out in their analysis. They don't even include it in their metrics. Because, for example, we understand that whatever incurs the wrath of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that's not sustainable. We know that you might, or a state might, or any other powerful actor might, implement or impose a policy that gives them dominance and it gives them success in the short term, but it's immoral and it's unjust. So we know that it has no long-term viability, because that's the sunnah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the sunnah of Allah is a real factor that can never be excluded from your evaluations or from your analysis. I mean, part of our job is to understand, is to identify and understand and explain how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is operating in the world in the current age, how his sunnah is operating in the current age. No, you can't exclude Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from your analysis. That's the biggest, most important factor that most Westerners do not include in their assessments, do not include in their forecasts or their analysis. And that means even the best of them are always going to be superficial. They're literally leaving out the most important operative power in the world. You know, in their atheistic secular terms, it would be like analyzing global affairs without factoring in America, acting like the United States doesn't exist, or acting like the United States has no influence over anything that happens on Earth. Well, as absurd as that would sound to them, it sounds even more absurd to us that they do not factor in the reality of God. And of course we know that they will completely disapprove of this approach. Obviously we know that. And they feel that they are entitled to have their disapproval matter to us. So you see, they remain completely stubborn as ever in their deeply ingrained sense of superiority. Even though, observably, their approach to the world has left their societies in a state of chaos, a chaos of lies and delusion and moral anarchy and racism and sexism and gross inequality. They've literally left hundreds of millions of victims in the wake of their so-called superior enlightened civilization. And even though we could see ahead of time what's happening to them at Middle Nation, we could see ahead of time what's happening to them, and we can see where it's going, and we can see why it's going that way. But not only could they not see it coming, they can't even understand it right now while it's happening to them. They can't even understand what is happening to them now or why. So their disapproving of our approach only validates our approach. I don't think you can imagine a greater source, actually, of legitimization than the disapproval of thugs and criminals and savages and the insane. Because that's what they are. So their approval or their disapproval is the same to us. They're both equally irrelevant. It doesn't matter. Approve or disapprove. They will disapprove of our approach, despite the fact that prediction after prediction after prediction made on Middle Nation using our approach has been proven accurate. While they make their analyses, the way they make their analyses is just like the person that's described in the Quran, who's in the darkness and only takes a step when the lightning flashes. And there's just this brief moment of light, and then they take a step, and then they're in the dark again. I mean, that's the way that they make their analysis, moment to moment, without ever actually understanding the real, what you could call macro trajectories. They operate on a micro level, on the superficial level, They're like someone who could tell you, could look at a table. They could look at a table and see all the dishes that are spread out on the table, tell you all the foods. They can tell you what all of those foods are, but they can't tell you how they taste. They can't tell you if the foods are even real or not, to be honest. They can't tell if those foods are real or made of wax or made of plastic. But if we're just going to go with that analogy, then a Muslim analyst would not only be able to know which foods are real, they would know how they smell, they would know how they taste, and so on. They'd even know how many calories there are. Meaning, it's not a superficial analysis. It's not a surface level how things appear to be analysis. It's a how things are analysis. Because look, it's like Israel, for example. For some reason, because of their frameworks, that's the reason, their flawed and deceitful frameworks, they'll say, until now, that Israel is powerful. Israel is high-tech. They have weapons. They're a democracy. They're this and they're that. All these ridiculous metrics, to them, it tells them that Israel is powerful. Because Israel can kill writ large, that means they're powerful. You see how deranged that is? A so-called country, a colonizer settler project, that is a chronic dependency, somehow, according to their metrics, is powerful. They're violent, and their violence equals power. That's the Western Enlightenment logic. If you're violent, you have the capacity for violence, then you're powerful. But the reality is that the only thing Israel even has left, in reality, is suicidal ideological inertia. Zionism acting as a terminal pathology. Israel will continue if you call a death spiral continuing. They're not acting out of strength. They're acting out of sheer panic. Panic about their impending irrelevance. Every step that they take into Gaza is a step that they're taking away from their own survival as a so-called Zionist Jewish state. No. Madness is not power. And power is not madness. But I totally understand why the West wouldn't know the difference. Look, Israel's power was always completely dependent on their strategic utility to America. But now America itself has a severely downgraded strategic utility to the owners and controllers of global financialized capital. That means that Israel is no longer even geopolitically coherent for the ruling powers of the world. And they've passed multiple signs telling them where the off-ramp is. Israel has. That's what the Abraham Accords was. That was a sign announcing that the off-ramp was coming up. That's what Saudi normalization with Iran was. Another sign announcing the off-ramp. The UAE, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia all joining BRICS, that was another sign of the off-ramp for Israel. That's what the ICJ case and the ICC case are. Just signs of the off-ramp for Israel. They're running on the fumes of radical, extremist, violent, doomsday Zionism now. They're flailing like a drowning man, while their economy falls apart in chunks. Their citizens are fleeing. Their society is in turmoil. They've lost the war of narrative. They're losing the war of alliances. They're losing the war of economy because they didn't want to take that off-ramp, you know? They didn't want to take the off-ramp. They didn't want to face the fact that they have to get off that highway. Meanwhile, they're heading for a cliff. But they think that America is going to equip their vehicle with wings, but they won't. They're defying the A National OCGFC. They're defying the GCC. They're defying BRICS, all of whom own the future of the region. Those are going to be Israel's new landlords. And the only way that Israel is going to be allowed to remain is if they pay rent. But, you know, they've been squatters for so long with an American bodyguard, they just can't adapt to the new situation, and they don't think they have to. You know, Saudi Arabia, who they fooled themselves into believing was going to normalize with them, was going to normalize with Israel without insisting upon Palestinian statehood. That's what they fooled themselves about. Well, now Saudi Arabia has been actually consolidating support from traditional European allies of Israel to call for and to recognize a Palestinian state. And the Gulf has understood that all it takes is money to make that happen. And they have more money to spend than anyone else. Trump doesn't work for the Zionists. He works for the OCGFC, the A National OCGFC. And the OCGFC do not need Israel's historic function anymore. The plug has been pulled on your project. And the more barbaric and the more savage and the more out of control you act, the easier it's going to be for them to hang you out. I mean, you are literally right now weaving the rope yourselves and tying the knot yourselves for the noose that you're going to dangle from. But madman violence always used to work for you, so you think it'll work now. You see how limited they are? They can't pivot. They can't adapt. They can only comprehend the now obsolete narrow context in which their savagery used to be enough to justify their existence. But you were never a real state. You were never a real country. You were always just a policy instrument for the United States. You only know how to do demolition, but the new job qualifications are knowing how to build, and you don't know how to do that. You never had to learn how to do that. So if you don't truly understand the world, if you cannot interpret reality properly, then you might mistake Israel's madness as power. But all anyone with any sense can see is abject weakness. You control no inputs. You're not self-sufficient to any degree. You're not adaptable, you know. You've been in the deep end of an empty swimming pool thinking that you're an Olympic swimmer. But in reality, you can't even tread water. And it's filling up. That pool is filling up and you're going under. Look, and this goes back to psychological decolonization and epistemological sovereignty. For Israel, you're in a region amidst the people whose stopwatch ticks in centuries, not weeks, not months, not years, not even decades. You understand? We are a permanent ummah. You can't fire missiles. You can't launch drones to try to stop the trajectory of the momentum of time. You can't shoot the future down. You're trying to melt a glacier with a cigarette lighter. No, the truth of the matter is, we are not the resistance. We are the irresistible force of epochal justice. Epochal justice that is moving by the mechanisms of divine justice. You're the ones who are resisting. You're resisting the unstoppable, and it's blatantly futile. You see, Zionism isn't just morally bankrupt, now it's strategically bankrupt. And this is where we know better. This is where we know better than other analysts. Because we know that strategic bankruptcy of the morally bankrupt is always just a matter of time. You can't murder your way into permanence. You forgot that everything that you always depended upon, everything that you always depended upon for your survival, you forgot that it's all controlled by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah's justice cannot be rushed and it cannot be postponed. And it can never be successfully resisted. Wallahi, it's a splendor to behold. You relied on America and the military-industrial complex. Israel did. And you thought that America and the military-industrial complex would protect you from Allah. And now that same heartless greed that fueled the system that enabled you to survive, that same heartless greed grew and grew and grew until it dwarfed the military-industrial complex in the form of the OCGFC. And not only did they swallow the military-industrial complex, but they swallowed up America itself. And now that same greedy system sees no value in you anymore. Well, you helped to birth the very powers that are now consigning you to the liability column on their spreadsheet. And now the very people, the very nations, the very people that you maligned, that you hated, that you said posed an existential threat to you, the Arabs, the Muslims, and that alleged threat was used to fuel the military-industrial complex that eventually gave rise to the OCGFC. Now those very people, those very nations, the Arabs, the Muslims, those very people are the ones with whom the OCGFC want to have as partners instead of you. And you're now just going to be part of a merger and acquisition deal between those two. And I'll tell you why. Because immorality and injustice and brutality are always only short-term strategies. You're like a geopolitical day trader, but we're long-term investors. So if you have a proper Islamic understanding when you look at the world, then you would know that Israel, from the beginning, was only ever going to be a blip in our history. All of Western so-called civilization, all of Western so-called civilization's dominance is a historical anomaly. No one with any sense ever thought otherwise. And here you can take sense as a synonym for Iman. Because if you have Iman, then you should have sense. And if you have sense, then you should have Iman. And no one with any Iman and no one with any sense could have ever believed that the West, much less Israel, could ever sustain their position in the long term. Not by the way that they were acting. Because wrongdoing is nothing but a prelude to punishment and humiliation. It works like that in the lives of individuals, and it works like that in the lives of nations, in the lives of civilizations. Because that is the sunnah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And all politics, all economics, all international relations, all geopolitics are subject to that reality.
So Shaheed Bolsen is trying to say it clearly that the blood, the efforts, the brain and everything was robbed from other regions to build the Western world. And that is a fact that the white supremacy or the whites have been denying for long, without regarding that in this world there's a time when generations will change and equality will be nurtured, and the black people, for instance, will want to be compensated on what they went through. Imagine the Western world or even America was built by the slave agents who were forcefully picked from Africa and other parts of the world because they were not seen as humans. They were regarded as lesser beings and were forcefully evicted from their regions, robbed their cultures, robbed their belongings and everything, and put into long hours of working, long hours without even compensation. This is something that has been talked about for the longest time possible, but the white man is still denying the fact that we know all the atrocities that happened in the ancient times, and it is time to tell them that enough is enough, because we need what belongs to us. For even the current times, there's still perpetrators, the Western perpetrators, who still find themselves evading the resources that belongs to other regions. For instance, in Africa, in Congo, for example, there's never been peace because there are a lot of interest of the Americans and even the British on the minerals that vastly exist in the country. Another example is South Africa, whereby the whites have been made to occupy lands that have vast minerals, gold and these valuables that are used to build Europe and American countries. This is a blatant disregard of human dignity and the need to develop together and appreciate what other peoples have. Let Americans and the Western world know that other regions also want to develop. They should allow these regions to use their resources or trade with them, have a mutual relationship rather than robbing them these belongings. That is the message that Shaheed Bolsen is bringing across in this video, because we are trying to create a world that is free from racial segregation, is free from white supremacy and any kind of maimed or disregard of another human race. That is the message that we always bring in this channel. Now, if you're watching us for the first time, I urge you to make a subscription, because that is a way that you will watch more of these videos and get the message home, how we are trying to get equality in this world and ensuring that people are made to understand the situations that are happening in different parts of the world. Also, do not forget to like, share and comment in this video. Thank you, and may God bless you.